Let the record reflect, we have reconvened with all members present, but Rob Cananello is absent, excused, out on business. Thank you. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So back together. I may have a motion for the regular minutes of December 9th, 2013.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
December 9th?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'll second it, because Pat wasn't on the council.
It's,
Probably
yeah, but
second.
it's still,
I'm
Oh,
not
you
going to
can?
vote.
Okay,
Yep.
all right.
discussion? Roll call vote.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes,
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Abstain.
Can I have a motion for the regular minutes of January 13th, 2014?
I'll move them.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call vote.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Jane?
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
All right. Motion for the executive minutes of January 27, 2014.
I'll move them.
I'll second.
This has already been discussed in executive. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
And a motion for regular minutes of January 27th, 2014.
I'll move them.
I'll second.
Discussion? Roll call vote.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
All right. Welcome. Winter is back. I apologize. I was trying to put together a proclamation would declare it spring, but I knew it would be a losing proposition, so I did not do that. But this was a winter that just keeps hanging on, and I want to, again, as I did last meeting, I think the meeting before, commend all those in the borough that have been working so hard to keep our streets clean, our sidewalks clear, and especially our downtown, that when you have a store owner who, sometimes when you're in the retail business, you feel frustrations and you sometimes may let a mayor know that. But I had a conversation with a owner and it was nothing but compliments. This was Butch from Bagel Chateau. He said, from the towns I've driven through, there's not a town that did a better job than the borough of Madison. And when you're in a business such as his that relies on that stop-and-go traffic, someone to pull up, jump out of the car, get their bagel and coffee, and head on, you know how important it is to have our downtown clear. So the snowbank could have been lost business for him and many other businesses down there. So we thank all the extra hours that DPW has put in, and that included while many of us were enjoying a 3-day weekend for President's Day, they worked every day of that time, clearing everything. So please, if you see them, as I said before, keep thanking them. A few other notes to keep in mind. This Saturday, March 1st, is our second annual leadership workshop. 8:30, we start with coffee and donuts and other healthy things, and go right into at 9 o'clock, start the session. We'll be covering how to run effective meetings, also the ins and outs of being part of government committees, which means Open Public Meetings Act, and the responsibilities related to that, and also sharing of goals of each of the committees. I extended a invitation to several of the neighboring towns, and I know Mayor Harris in Chatham Borough has extended the invitation to some of their committee leadership, so we will have some Chatham people join us. So I think it'll be great to be able to share ideas with a neighboring community. So even if you're not in the committee, you want to come down, you are welcome to. Again, 8:30, we start with the formal part starting at 9 o'clock. Have a message from New Jersey courts that the state will be upgrading our information technology system in our municipal court. And so this is no cost to the Borough of Madison, and certainly greatly appreciated, and probably has a lot to do with the great court and the fact that we are running court of 5 towns out of our courtroom. Also, as you plan your summer driving, long time away in this cold weather, I have a letter from DOT that Route 24 freeway will be resurfaced this summer from milepost 0, which is basically at 287, to milepost 6.9, which is, I think, basically where it merges with, or right by Milburn and Short Hills Mall area. So there will be no disruptions during rush and commuting hours, and we will see that. Yep. And it will be mostly limited to off-hour times. There may be times when certain exit ramps will be closed, but not all of them at the same time. So I wanted you to be aware of that. And one last thing before I come on down is in the January League of Municipalities magazine, we have a beautiful picture of a team of Madisonians down there accepting our Sustainable New Jersey Awards, which we were presented to our committee here back in January, I guess it was last year. And so they are in the committee room if you want to take a look at them. But in the picture we have, I won't read the people that aren't in town, but Ben Wolkowitz, Osprey Bailey, Heather Shepard, Kathy Cacavelli, who are both members of the Sustainable Madison Committee, Betsy Ullman, the chair of the Madison Environmental Commission and the Sustainable Madison, and Mayor Bob Conti, who I assume that's supposed to be me. But, so it was a lot of work, and it's good to see that we got recognized, and so we now can be proud that we shared that with the state. The cat with a hat. Not in a box, not with a fox. I do not like green eggs and a ham. Sam, I am. Sorry, had to do that a little. So this is our annual, just to recognize the importance of reading, whether it's getting our children to read or reading to them. Whereas the citizens of the Borough of Madison stand firmly committed to promoting reading as a catalyst for our students' future academic success, their preparation for America's jobs of the future, and their ability to compete in the global economy, and whereas Madison has provided significant leadership in the area of community involvement in the education of our youth, grounded in the principle that educational investment is the key to communities' well-being and long-term quality of life, and whereas the NEA's Read Across America, a national celebration of reading, will be conducted on March 3rd, 2014, the day that would have been the 110th birthday of Theodore Seuss Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss. And whereas Read Across America, sponsored by the National Education Association, promotes reading and adult involvement in education of our community students. Now, therefore, I, Robert H. Conley, the Mayor of Borough of Madison, on behalf of the governing body, call on the citizens of Madison to assure that every child is in a safe place reading together with a caring adult on March 3rd, 2014. Further, we enthusiastically endorse the NEA's Read Across America and recommit our community to engage in programs and activities to make America's children the best readers in the world. And just a little side note, since Gail Stein is a librarian at Central Avenue School, where both my sons attended, my younger son, Jack, just announced last week he'll be majoring in English. So he got a great little start right there in the library. So thank you for your work.
Well, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the staff at Central Avenue School. Very, very happy to accept this. I was reading to first grade today, and I was reading one of the easy readers, and the title is I Can Read With My Eyes Shut. And as Dr. Seuss said, the more you read, the more you will know. And this year, the mayor is going to be a celebrity reader on Monday, Read Across America Day. We're going to have a reading train. Everybody stops and reads for 15 minutes. We're going to have Dr. Seuss trivia, and the kids win prizes to a bookstore if they're right. And it'll be a week of really reading and remembering. We're having a spirit week. Monday is Crazy Hat Day. Tuesday is Green Day for green eggs and ham. Wednesday is Wacky Wednesday, mismatched clothes, that's my favorite. Thursday is Thing 1 and Thing 2, wear red. and so on and so on. So thank you very, very much. It's always a pleasure being here and accepting this for the school.
Thank you for all you do. See you Monday. Things you learn, I thought Miss Match Day was every day, but I'm going to fix my socks, I guess. All right, reports from committees. Health, Mr. Landrigan.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. First, the Health Department is running a Healthy Bones program. It's a 24-week program. It's an exercise program aimed at helping people avoid osteoporosis. They encourage everyone to call. The number is 973-593-3079. It's typically heavily attended, and if you're interested, please call the Health Department. That's it for health. Now, I asked the mayor if I could give an update on what I call the master plan, or what may also be known as the 39-acre committee. That's the group that was formed a while back to look at the fields and wetlands directly across from the turf fields from the MRC. A while back, the committee was formed. It's comprised of representatives from different sports organizations, the seniors, the Board of Ed, parents with children in the community. And the goal was to really try to find out what can we do with that space. We put in the turf fields, which everybody's using, but thought was given to, well, what about the rest of the area? Now, I'm just going to give a very brief update tonight. In the month of March, the different subcommittees are going to come. They're going to present to council the concepts that we've come up with and the details of the plans. Right now, we're looking at a trails proposal. This would connect, hopefully, the trails within that area to other existing trails in the borough of Madison. I know a lot of talks have been given about, the traction line trail and whatnot. This would possibly connect that. Plus, it's also looking at providing a good, safe area for cross-country trainers to practice. Right now, you'll see them running along Main Street in Madison. Not the best thing to do, so we're looking at developing trails in that area. The other piece of it, there's 5 in total, I'll be quick. It's a wetlands restoration, which includes a deer fencing. We've called in the New Jersey Land Conservatory. We have representatives from our Environmental Commission. And what we've come to learn is that area has one of the few remaining wetlands in the state of New Jersey. Not many people know that. So what we're doing is, and Mr. Stocker talked about it before, we're putting in deer fencing to try to restore them. And then we're looking at what else can be done in that area. It's a disappearing treasure in this state. Another piece is a playground. Right across from it is the turf fields. A lot of families go there. Parents have young children. The thought process was, and keeping cost in mind, and everything that we're talking about is dictated by cost. Open space has very limited funding. We're looking for grants right now to do a lot of this work, and one of the proposals is put in a playground where a parent who has a young child can stay with the child and then watch her other child play a sport on the turf fields. Well, this would have been a great year for it, but unfortunately it's not in place yet. It is an area for a snow hill. There's a big mound there. Right now, a lot of the kids go to the public golf courses, which really isn't where they're supposed to be. So we're looking at the possibility of making that an area where children can go with their sleds when it snows, sled in a safe environment that has been prepared for them. There won't be any issues. And finally, a dog park. A lot of other communities around here are talking about dog parks. They've put them in, and that's one of the other options on the table. Now, like I said, later this month, or actually in March, we're going to have each of the subcommittees come in, give a detailed, thorough proposal of what they're looking to do. If it's a phased approach, so be it, and the associated funding with it. Thank you, Mayor.
And the sledding hill would be children of all ages.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'll be with them.
All right. If Public Works and Engineering, Carmel, if you have a report as backup, plus if you can do utilities.
Yeah, I don't have anything from engineering, but David sent from Public Works, a very short message that here they go again. They had 2 busy weeks with the 14 inches of snow. They removed a lot of snow, and all over town, actually helped out at the schools. And David was able, when nobody else was getting salt, was able to get tons of it delivered actually today. So what Public Works is now actually doing is, because the roads were not plowed, there was so much snow on the roads, they're going out and opening up with the loader and getting some of that snow and just transporting it to other places. So that was all from David. Utilities from Micah Piano. They also had to continue their clearing of the driveways in the past at all the substations. They have continued maintenance on their bucket and digger trucks. This time of the year, everything is really taking a hit. And now they're preparing transformers for 3-phase service to the new building on 21 Central Avenue, so they've been down there working. They did respond to only 1 residential outage from the storm, which I find remarkable. They also removed several broken limbs from the storm. And then there was an outage at Central Avenue School that was caused by a cute little squirrel, so they took care of that. They're inspecting and making needed repairs to underground manhole pumps in anticipation of the melting snow. That's a major problem if those underground manholes, because there's lots of conduit that goes through them. So with the melting snow, it creates a problem sometimes for them. Now, from the Water Department, they've had some problems with Well A and Well D. The Well A, VD, FD Drive, and that's now scheduled for repair. And at Well D, the fuel recorder is repaired. They're doing lots of markouts for utilities and builder reconstruction, believe it or not. Meter installations have kind of slowed down with the snow. They're starting the process to gather information for the annual Consumer Confidence Report and monthly water use data. They've tested the well generators to make sure that they're all working. They've checked the chlorine levels at the Madison tank, and they're finishing up all the water testing for February. That's all, Mayor.
Thank you. Public Safety, Ms. Bailey.
Thank you, Mayor. From the Fire Department, over the past week, the Fire Department has cleared approximately 450 fire hydrants of snow and ice. The Fire Department utilized a plow, a rented mini backhoe, shovels, and a local contractor to gain access to the buried hydrants. Both career and volunteer personnel worked many hours over the past week to dig out the hydrants. And the Fire Department would also like to thank those residents who did clear a hydrant. And a few of the buildings downtown on Main Street had ice and snow hanging over the sidewalks that posed a safety hazard for the pedestrians walking below. So the Fire Department used their ladder truck to knock off dangerously hanging ice and snow from some of the edges of the roofs and eaves of our downtown buildings. And the Public Safety Complex did sustain some damage from the heavy snow that slid off its back roof. Firefighters shoveled snow from the roof and temporarily patched a hole in the roof until a contractor is hired to make permanent repairs. The vent pipes from the boilers were up on top of there, and they were damaged by the snow and the sliding snow, resulting in one of the boilers having to be shut off. So they were busy. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Finance Borough Clerk, Mr. Wolkowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The few comments I have are regarding the budget, and so I think I'll pass for the moment and incorporate them in comments later.
Very good.
Thank you.
Community Affairs, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I'm going to start out with the Morris County Chapter of the League of Municipalities. Last week, Mayor Connolly and I attended the quarterly meeting of the Morris County Chapter of the League, heard reports from Bill Dressler, Executive Director of the League, and Assemblyman Anthony Bucco. Key issues for municipalities that they wanted us to continue to monitor is the extension of the 2% cap on the interest arbitration awards, loss of state aid if municipality rejects a sharing of services, and potential fallout from the large increase in the state's pension payments. It's important that we stay abreast of what's happening in Trenton on these three issues and reach out to our legislative representatives to let them know that we have serious concerns about how these issues will impact our ability to maintain services and restrain increases in the tax levies. Community Affairs, Senior Citizens Advisory Committee, their tax program is off to a good start. The Senior Center has the same 8 volunteer counselors as in the past few years, and the first 2 Wednesday sessions have brought in 33 clients, with an additional 50 on the schedule and more to come. They will continue their tradition of honoring volunteers at a luncheon in late April, and their Fear of Falling class has met twice, but they've decided to limit the number of participants to 8 per session so the instructor can focus on the specific student's needs. And from the Downtown Development Commission, mind if I say anything about the upcoming anniversary?
Go right ahead.
Okay.
We'll have a proclamation next meeting, but a little teaser.
Okay. They have formed a committee to spearhead the year-long celebration of Madison's 125th anniversary, which will be later this year, and the mayor will have a lot more about that coming up. Collaborations with the school board, Historic Preservation Committee, and the chamber are on the works. The DDC is purchasing a set of 24 flags commemorating Madison's 125th birthday to be displayed throughout the downtown and possibly sold later as a fundraiser. Also, Commissioners Mark Fabianski and Barb Short are creating a mobile performance space called Madison Sidewalk Sounds that will feature local talent this summer. And also being planned is a volunteer event in April. It'll be an opportunity for interested people to meet the commissioners, learn about the various projects, events, and get involved with the DDC. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any communications or petitions?
Yes, Mayor. Mayor and Council received an email February the 18th from Marilyn Maslewski of Academy Road regarding the 2014 municipal budget.
Thank you, Marilyn. All right, this is our first of 2 invitations for discussion, and well-timed today because we have only one agenda discussion, and that is the budget. We did that intentionally so we could spend time on the final adjustments to the budget. So if you're here to speak about that, you can share your thoughts before we go into discussion time, and then you'll have another chance in our regular invitation, which will come right after our budget discussion, since there are no ordinances for hearing. So you can make suggestions ahead of time, and afterwards follow up again if you have more comments related to the budget. So the only other thing, if you don't want to comment on the budget for this first invitation for discussion, the only other thing you can comment on are the resolutions that are listed on the consent agenda. So with those guidelines, if anyone wishes to come up and say a few words, please step up to the lectern, state your name, your address, and write the same on the clipboard, and then keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Welcome, Tom.
Since I've been up here.
Yes. Always good to have good old friends coming back.
Haircut, so nobody comments. Mr. Catanello tonight?
Yes, he is in Europe.
So, thank you for letting me come up here and speak, or at least ask some questions for a second. One thing I want to know is that after you make your budget presentation and you have your discussion, I assume Mr. Calfoot is going to come up and speak. Will he still be here for questions after that?
Yes, we'll,
Okay, because that's kind of important since he
Yep.
helps you to structure the whole budget. So another comment too is that I see that there is a budget option here from Mr. Catanello and Mr. Rowe, and they have some of their own comments, but they mention on their instruction sheet that some of their changes are highlighted in colors, and you didn't print this in color, so it's kind of hard to follow.
yeah, there was a little budget cut
in
on
the
that
budget
one.
for a color
Yes.
printer?
Yep.
For next year, I will definitely
I didn't look at it,
approve
Tom, but they
that.
must be in gray.
What's that?
They must be in gray, right?
Great, yeah. Shit, look,
Oh,
yeah.
so you mean this little shading right here?
Yeah.
I guess so, yeah.
Okay. Just,
yep.
I can figure it out, I just didn't have enough time to figure it out while I was sitting there. So if you look at the budget here that you have with 13-14, and then on page 8, it says 14-15. The first thing that jumps out at me is that you're going to have a very nice surplus, which we didn't have in years past, of $3.48 million. So is the borough or is the council proposing that should be the level of surplus that we should maintain from here on in?
So we'll try to adjust, but as you ask these questions, we'll make notes, so,
All right.
so we'll try to address them.
Okay, because that is a change from prior years. I don't think you ever carried, at least not since I've been watching the council operate and following some of the town's budgets. I don't think it's been that high, but you can comment on that. And then, of course, which a question a lot of people have is with regards to the electric surplus. There's your version, or whoever put the municipal budget together, and then there's the Rowe and Catanello version. And I'm assuming that to get to the town's version, which has us by 2015, a total surplus of 7.8 million, that there won't be any significant reduction in electricity costs to the borough residents.
Address that, okay?
All right?
Yep.
That is kind of important, Mayor. You've probably heard that discussion quite a bit during your tenure. Another thing I wanted to ask also is with regards to the health insurance costs and the increase. And I only can speak for the Board of Ed, since I'm on the Finance Committee. In the coming years, we're going to see savings benefit from the employees contributing to the healthcare cost. And I'm assuming it's the same for the borough. I don't know if you already started to see some benefit. We're just starting to see some benefit in this coming year because of the contract that we had with the employees before. So I don't know when yours starts to take effect, and is that factored into the 6% that you have here as your percent change from 13 to 14? So another question. So the capital improvement fund is also, so that's what I don't understand. You're going to have an operating surplus of $3.48 million, and then you're going to have a capital improvement fund of $3.5 million. So that's $7 million. And then you're also going to have an electric utility surplus of about almost $6 million. Your debt service isn't changing. So it just seems like you're putting a lot away for a rainy day, which is good planning in some respects. But then you're also increasing some of your operating budgets. You're going up 9% on your department operating expenses. And I'm just wondering if that's, something that now that you have a surplus, you're going to start to do, and then if that something changes and the surplus goes away, then we're in a predicament that we were in a few years ago when you didn't have numbers like this in the black. So, that's just something that I'd like to know where that's coming from. Maybe you've already discussed it. I haven't attended any meetings before, so I want to know why the operating. Is it for the skating rink?
That's right. Good question.
Okay, then I approve it. Okay, that's it for now.
Thank you.
Thanks for
So
letting me
just,
talk.
so the ones we'll incorporate into level of surplus, electric rates and the impact on these decisions, health insurance, the size of the capital improvement fund, and the part of the budget related to department operating expenses. So we'll have that covered.
One more question.
Oh,
And I know that this has been
I let
asked
you go over budget on 3
100
minutes.
times. Wait, but this is a good one.
Okay.
So I know that it's important to keep a reserve for uncollected taxes, but somebody has to know what the history is of uncollected taxes for the last 10 years, at least as long as Mr. Califoot's been handling our budget as a CFO, our management of finances. So what is the pattern?
So we'll cover with the pattern on that, and also what happens when very little is used versus a whole lot. So we'll
Okay.
cover both of that.
Has there ever been a whole lot used?
Right, so, thank you. Anyone else wishing to be heard or set up some more questions that you want us to cover in the next, when we get to discussion? Seeing none, I close this part of the meeting, and we move on to our one agenda item, which is the municipal budget. And Jim, start off, and if you can, as you bring us up to date as to what has happened since the last meeting, and if you can cover some of Tom's questions would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. for everyone in the audience, and the council does have it, the document that the administration and CFO have put together in terms of a budget is a single one-page document that's available up on the table there. It has the 2013-14 and then 2014-15. Thomas referenced it. Back a week and a half ago, I sent a memo to council about some changes that have occurred since our last budget discussions here in council, and I'd like to bring some of that information to light, and I think Mr. Wolkowitz will do that as well. Do you want to go first, Ben, or do you want me to go
No,
first?
please. You can
Okay.
start.
So, one very positive news that has occurred is a positive surplus generation due to two non-recurring factors. The first factor is the addition of Realogy's property on our tax rolls. That alone is going to have a significant impact in helping to lower property taxes. Specifically, the benefit this year in terms of surplus is that what typically happens with tax collection is that we strike a tax rate, and we strike a tax rate in April after we've closed our budget, after we've closed our assessment book. And we take the total amount that we need to generate from county, state, county and municipal and Board of Ed needs, and then we divide that by the assessed values. Well, what happens in July or August when someone has an addition on their house, or a big beautiful building like Realogy opens up? Our tax assessor issues them a added assessment bill and says, congratulations, wonderful addition, congratulations, wonderful building, here's your new tax bill. That additional revenue was not counted on back in April when we struck the tax rate. So that additional revenue comes to the borough, and it comes to the borough and immediately has an impact and falls straight to surplus. We've only had this incident happen 2 times in the last 20-plus years in the borough where the added and omitted taxes have had a significant positive impact. One was when Giralda was first being developed, and the second is with the development of the Realogy property. It generated, this year alone, a $400,000 net positive to the surplus of the Borough of Madison. But what it also did is it increased our total assessed property values in town. And council received a packet a few weeks ago, and this packet will be posted on RoseNet. That has a table that shows our assessed values. It's basically add up every property in the town, how much is it worth? And in 2013, it was worth $3.38 billion. The challenge financially for the borough and for the residents of Madison is that the assessed values have been dropping for 12 years in a row. Very little bits, but they've been dropping. And what that in essence means is everyone has to pay a little more in tax. This year is the first year where assessed values have gone up, primarily because of Realogy, and they've gone up significantly. They've gone up 1.4%, or the equivalent of approximately $50 million. That increase in assessed value of 1.4% in essence means that the residents of the Borough of Madison could see a 0% increase in their property taxes or even a decrease in their property taxes. It's a 1.4% increase in assessed values if the municipal, Board of Ed, and county budgets were to all come in at 0%. It's certainly possible some of them will. I don't know about the Board of Ed. Every resident in the Borough of Madison would see an actual decrease in their property taxes. So increasing assessed values is a tremendous positive long-term for the Borough of Madison, and it's something we're obviously always looking to do. It's had a net positive impact on our surplus this year. The second, and it'll answer a little bit of Thomas's question about the reserve for uncollected tax, the second major net benefit to surplus has been a very high tax collection rate. And we have our tax collector, and every year we send out bills. And we talked about this a meeting ago where we send out, and I'll use an illustrative example, we send out $50 million worth of bills, and we If we only needed to collect $50 million, we know we wouldn't collect every dollar from the residents because sometimes people are delinquent on their taxes. So we have a reserve for uncollected tax that's added on. So if we needed to collect 50 million, we in the town of Madison here add about 1.6 million as a reserve for uncollected tax. Every year, the tax collection rate fluctuates. It fluctuates primarily based on the economy and people's ability to pay their property taxes. A schedule was included in the council's packet and will be posted on RoseNet that talks about the collection rate, but as recently as 2011, the tax collection rate was just a little above 98%. This year, for 2013, it was 99.46%, the highest tax collection rate we've had in a number of years. That's had a net positive to our surplus. So those two very positive items have caused a net positive to our surplus. It's not sustainable, though, and Thomas brought up a very good point about the sustainability of surplus and the $3.48 million number that the administration has put in their surplus budget on line 1, right here on this budget document. This surplus is kind of a one-shot. In actuality, the benefit of having a very high tax collection rate means it's going to be a net negative on surplus next year because there'll be less delinquent taxes coming in the following year. But in essence, these are two very positive items that have generated $700,000 in additional municipal surplus this year. Again, I strongly recommend that. That is not a sustainable source of surplus, and as such, I do not recommend a significant increase in the use of surplus in the operating budget. With that, there are a few other notes that I had given to council, and I just want to reference to the general public. The document that will be posted tomorrow on RoseNet has additional schedules that were asked by council, including water utility surplus. We talked about non-municipal sources of revenue, miscellaneous revenue, the tax collection rates that I just discussed, and a 2015 budget document, which people have. It also includes an actual kilowatts purchased versus actual purchased power document for our electric utility. Couple of other items that I want to bring to council's attention, and I know Mr. Wolkowitz has a few other items. The council asked us, and we definitely referenced at the last council meeting, that we were concerned about our snow removal and rock salt line items in the budget. And with that, we did have myself, Ray Cody, and Robert Caliphate look at the numbers, and a memo was issued to council this afternoon requesting that there be an increase of $50,000 net in the balance to be added to snow removal overtime. We're fine on rock salt, we're fine on brine, we're fine on fuel. The one issue is the overtime for DPW. We need, we believe, $90,000. We've identified $40,000 of it where it can be funded within moving some line items in the budget, but an additional $50,000 would need to be funded, and we're recommending that that come from a municipal surplus. A couple of other items that haven't been brought to the public's attention, but the council was recently made aware of. Back in October of 2013, our master meter for our electric utility had some problems and went down. This master meter is controlled by Jersey Central Power and Light, and it's used to calculate the amount of kilowatts that we consume as an entire municipality, and that meter went down for a number of months, and we're currently working with JCP&L, with Constellation Energy, to make sure that an estimated bill that we've received is correct. So because of that, that makes our electric utility surplus numbers a little more challenging to estimate going into 2014. Also, as previously discussed, we still do not know the impact of Pfizer and that building emptying out on our electric utility revenue. And then finally, as we go into the new electric utility contracts, we've discussed this at council, that a portion of it, a very small portion of it, will require the Borough of Madison to go into the spot market and at times either purchase or sell a small amount of electricity. And there has been a significant amount of volatility in that market due to the polar vortex and due to the significant cold snap that's happened. You've often heard us talk about the volatility in the summer and how summer peaking can be a significant cost to the Borough of Madison, and over $3 million in terms of marginal peaking costs. That we're now seeing in the spot market some spikes that are we want to bring to your attention. We believe our electric utility budget that we previously presented is still in order, but that's just another small volatility in the electric utility and a reason that the administration's budget has been fairly cautious in the amount of utility profit or surplus that we're going to realize or use. We're kind of taking we're from Missouri approach that we want to, wait and see approach with regard to the surplus that's generated from the new contracts that come off. With that, I think Mr. Wolkowitz has a couple of other points.
Let me just, before we go, just looking at Tom's list, I think electric rates we'll cover during discussion.
Circle back and cover
He also
But
brought up
health insurance.
Chapter 78. I think he was, I think Tom was referring to Chapter 78, PL 2011, which is the law that requires employees to pay for their health benefits. It's a 4-year phase-in. It's tiered over the 4 years. By the 4th year, an employee who is making $100,000 or more will be paying 35% of the cost of their health benefits. The Borough of Madison is in the state health benefits plan. Right now, family coverage is about $24,000 for full family coverage, prescription, major medical. So an employee will be paying roughly $8,500 right now. If that number grows, in terms of the cost, the employee will be paying more. What the law says too is that the 35%, in terms of contract negotiations, because it's the number of labor agreements, the phased-in amount, the 35% becomes the new floor. It does become an item that's negotiable after it's fully phased in, but that is the floor upon which the various unions will have to negotiate from. It doesn't revert back down to the lower level. And I think most of the municipal budgets throughout the state are now utilizing that money that's collected from the employees to help offset the cost of health care for the borough in terms of expenses.
So, and to layer on top of what Matt said, and to answer Thomas's question about the health insurance, are the savings factored in? We believe the savings are factored into the number. We realize it's a 6% increase number here. There are certain costs. The family plan itself is going up over 10%. We've had new employees that we've hired, so we have to take into account new employees that health insurance, new headcount that's been added to this, which is why it's increasing. And then, we also need to take into account the fact that if we have an employee that's single and they shift to married, or single and they shift to family, that there's an increase in cost that we have to be able to absorb and maintain. That line item, if it doesn't get spent, falls to surplus. We don't go out and buy furniture or buy flags or anything else like that with it. It's purely established for health insurance, and we need to make sure that we have enough money in that. Should there be any additional headcount that's added, we need to take into account the headcount that's already been added and any changes that could occur throughout the year with plan changes for the employees. So while the 6% number may look like, well, does it make sense to be 6% when money's coming back in? Our calculations indicate that it's appropriate. And I'll answer a couple other of Thomas's questions too. Thomas referenced that in 2015, our administration's budget has a use of $7.8 million of electric utility, both for capital and operating, and he asked, will rates go down? As I said before, we're kind of taking a from Missouri approach. We want to make sure that our spot market costs are in line. We want to make sure that the revenues that we're hoping are going to come in are actually going to come in. It's a little bit dicey for us to take and project out future profit that's going to happen in July, August, and September when the new contracts are coming in, and actually go ahead and realize that and spend that in this year or even in next year. I think we'll have a much better feel for the performance of the electric utility under the new contracts by the fourth quarter of this year. So will rates go down? in upcoming years. From an administration standpoint, we don't have an answer for that. We're kind of taking a wait-and-see approach. Thomas referenced the use of surplus at $3.48 million. We did have a lengthy discussion at a previous council meeting. Thomas, go to rosenet.org and click on the link for YouTube, and you'll be able to see it. But we believe that the $3.48 million use of municipal operating surplus to reduce the tax burden is an appropriate number. That is a very sustainable number, and it's extremely important for us to develop and find a sustainable number. We believe 3.48 is sustainable. I know that the strategic planning committee that's headed by Tom Bintinger, that's going to be discussing budgets, is going to take a very, very deep look in that and come up with an appropriate bogey for what surplus should be on a recurring basis, and then what the high and low amounts should be in terms of total surplus that we have on hand. So I think that that's appropriate. Capital, Thomas, I think you just mentioned that you referenced $3.5 million. Administration is recommending that. We had a capital budget that's available online that projects out $3.5 million need for a number of years. You referenced operating budget increases. Some of those operating budget increases are due to the fact that we have offsetting municipal sources that are increasing. For example, we recently signed a joint court agreement with Morris Township, and we're going to be receiving a significant amount of revenue for that, and that is going to be offset, unfortunately, by a certain amount of operating expenses. So those operating expenses, the operating expenses for taking over Chatham's construction code and services and alike, a 2% increase in a very large dollar item, which is our waste flow tipping fees for the garbage, and other items like that have caused an increase in the operating budget on certain line items. And finally, Thomas, you mentioned the reserve for uncollected tax. We have it at $1.56 million. Have we ever really needed that? And I will, again, have this posted online. It was available previously and discussed previously, but bear with me here. There were years in only just a couple years ago where we needed to use 2/3 or more of the reserve for uncollected tax that we had. So it was, there's a significant amount of need for having a robust reserve for uncollected tax. I'm looking at it now. In 2011, we had a very small amount of surplus fall due to reserve for uncollected tax, because in 2011 we had a lot of delinquent taxes. It was our lowest tax collection rate. I referenced that earlier. And as a result, almost $1 million of the reserve for uncollected tax had to be used because we have to pay the Board of Ed. When you guys issue a bill to us, we have to pay it. We have to pay the county. And so we have this reserve to make sure that we're going to collect enough in taxes. The reserve ultimately generates surplus. So when we talk about the sustainability of that $3.48 million, the reserve for uncollected tax is a major driver of that, to make that $3.48 million sustainable. So again, those line items don't get spent on anything else. The reserve for uncollected tax, if we've got extra money, we don't go out and buy furniture or party hats. That money falls straight to surplus and becomes tax relief to the residents of Madison in the following year. I think I answered all of Thomas's questions.
I think you covered it. Just as a reminder, with you mentioned the capital, which is jumping up to 3.5 as far as the amount of money. We've already, as a council, committed about half of that, almost 1.7 million, to the 2014 road program. So it shows, there's a lot to be done, and that's why we wanted to commit that money up front, and that only leaves about 1.8 for the other things. All right, Ben?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tom, I just want to add, I'll start out by adding a footnote to the comments that Jim made. I also thought that reserve for uncollected taxes looked awfully high. I thought the same last year. And I went back, I was able to get really good data going back to 1997 on the budgets of the borough. We're within the third decimal point of the exact same ratio we had over that period of time. In other words, there's been no volatility to speak of. Although the collections have gone up and down, the amount we've put aside as reserves as a percentage of the total budget is one of the great constants of life here. I was quite surprised by it, but it is the fact. Let me begin by adding a couple of other points to the list that Jim came up with, and then I'd like to speak broadly about the budget and make some recommendations. In general terms, I have two items. One is that I had said on a couple of occasions that we're negotiating with the joint meeting. That's the sewage treatment plant that we share with Chatham Borough. And the result of those negotiations should result in a significant decrease in our costs. Our relative share would go down, and our costs presumably would go down along with them. Unfortunately, I was speaking on data and a budget number that had not yet reflected, and I wish it had been told that, but I hadn't, the cancellation of prior year appropriations. And for whatever reason, last year was significantly lower than the preceding year. The consequence of that is that the spread that I thought we'd have between what we first initially thought we would have to spend as our share of the joint meeting and what in fact we will have to spend is $8,000. And initially it looked more like 60. In either case, I think it belongs under the broad category of rounding error. I'm very bad when it comes to multiple figures, but in the top of my head, I believe that $8,000 is about 2.7 thousandths of a percent of the total budget. So I'm not too worried, not yet. The other one is that we have a pilot agreement with Fairleigh Dickinson that was recently executed. Pilot stands for payment in lieu of taxes. Very beneficial. We love these things. And the first year payment from Fairleigh Dickinson will be $38,000. 5% of this amount goes to the county, so that's approximately $1,900. It leaves us with $36,000 that is yet to be reflected in the budget and is available for multiple uses. I guess you're not surprised to know I have at least one in mind, and I'll get to that momentarily. Let me start out by saying that I had, some while ago, had a minor tweaking with, I think, some significance of the budget that was proposed by the administration. Last year, as you may recall, we were in lockstep. We had met many times, spent many hours together, and indeed supported exactly the same numbers. This year, we indeed have spent many hours together. I'm not sure, but I think I closed on about 100 today when I was on the phone with Jim. And I very much approve of the approach. I think given this kind of year where we've already seen some outlier events, and as well we're in a transition with regards to our electric utility, and also from the guidance we hope to be getting from our strategic, strategic planning committees. So as a result of all that, I don't think it's a year to make draconian changes in the budget, and forced upon us, and in some ways I welcome it, in some ways I wish it wasn't me, the underinvestment in capital that we've had over the last several years has come to a point where it can no longer exist. I mean, we know we're pushing some numbers here, but if you thought the roads were bad 6 months ago, I hate to think what we're going to be driving across pretty soon. And on top of that is our equipment requests that are justified. In many cases, we have people driving around in cars that none of you would drive in if you had an option. They're ancient. They're probably not safe. I don't even want to go into all that. But the point is, we have 3 years, as far as I can see, of very significant capital spends if we're going to take Madison to the town that we all want to live in. And I think we all agree now it's a great place, except I don't like going down and then fill in the blank for the street or avenue you avoid when you're driving somewhere. So we've got to take care of those things. I realize it's a big number. I am very much in support of it, and I think it's being funded properly. For the last several years, we have funded a de minimis amount of capital. Going back 2 years, $750,000. That would pay for about 40% of the road work we've authorized already. And last year, we had $1 million. And you might ask, well, how could it be so little? Well, the answer is we had two sources for that money. Events that were unlikely to be repeatable, so we had one-off events that spilled out some money, but you could not plan on them. And secondly, we did have a fund balance account as the result of the allocation of funds for some construction that never took place. And so what you do with that is you put it in an account and you draw it down on a needs basis for capital improvement projects, because you've already said it's for capital. And this year, we're liquidating it. For all practical purposes, we're taking it to zero. So that's a little of the background. Now, where we come out in a little different place is I was personally, and I can't speak for many, but I'm sure many of you were in this camp, were disappointed. We took the municipal budget rate, tax rate down, the increase down by 75 basis points, a reasonable amount. We took down the open space tax by 20 basis points, again, a reasonable amount. However, we had a reassessment of property. Not our idea, forced on us. We hadn't done it since '99. And it resulted, obviously, in our property going up. And for most of us, that meant an increase in taxes. Not all, but certainly for a large portion of the community. So here I was talking about how we were working hard to get taxes down. You looked at your bill and said, what is he talking about, right? And me included. I mean, I was kind of disheartened by that all. I looked back at '99 because absent the work of the strategic planning committees, which we hope to have, by the way, by the end of the year, and so they will be in place to assist us next year. But absent that, I've looked at historical data, which you've heard me talk about before. In 2000, taxes, municipal taxes in Chatham Borough went down almost 2%. They didn't stay the same. They didn't go up. They absolutely declined. And the only reason I can think of that makes any sense whatsoever is that's the same year that the reassessments took effect. And so that had to be on the council operating on behalf of the residents in an effort to at least in some way make up for the fact that reassessments in and of themselves could result in a reallocation of taxes across the town. With that, in that spirit and with that in mind, I have proposed that we do not increase the municipal taxes this year. Now, having said that, I quickly have to tell you, we represent 24% of your tax bill. You have the county and you have the Board of Ed. And our staying at zero, if indeed the council agrees with me and approves that, will have an impact, a very favorable one, but it doesn't mean your taxes will not increase at all. Right? For that to happen, all those three entities would have to have a zero tax increase. Board of Ed, county, and of course us. The other, excuse me, the other issue I want to address is the fact that we will have a more electric surplus, not only this year, but ongoing. I very much agree with Jim. He has shared with me some of the emails that have floated around from people who belong to the group of independent municipalities that have their own power companies, and those who buy in the spot market are obviously complaining. Right? This is not a great time. Natural gas has gone up about 46% since the first of the year. It's the major input into the production of electric energy. And obviously none of the producers are absorbing it. They're passing it on to the extent they can. So we're in a little bit of new territory, but if we look back on how the borough was run prior to the 4 years where we had a fixed rate on our supply of electricity, you'll see a period where we routinely took a significant amount of electric surplus, applied it to operating, and as well applied it to capital, and electric rates, of course, were lower. I would hope that we could reduce electric rates over time by a significant amount. I'm opposed to doing it this year for all the reasons I said. I mean, the volatility of everything I've looked at has been the stuff you lose sleep over. I mean, you think you've got a handle on it, and then you wake up and discover that you have a huge overtime bill because you've seen our streets getting plowed on holidays and weekends. It had to be done. These sort of unanticipated events will no doubt continue to happen. But knowing that and saying that, I've listened to the council in previous years, and since I've been on it, talk about how difficult it is for some people to continue to live in this town. Those people, to what I understand, are primarily elderly and disabled people who receive some form of public assistance, generally from the state, to help them offset some other expenses. What I've proposed is that we take $100,000 out of electric surplus, put it in an account to be distributed to that population to reduce their electric rates. In time, I'd like to see it have us do it broadly across all residents, but I think the time has more than come where we need to stop talking about what we're going to do for people who have trouble living here and actually do something material. So those are my two recommendations. Robert Califoot said, with some reluctance, he'd support them. I hope you don't mind my quoting you. And I find Robert is the consummate professional when it comes to putting together a budget and has, for many, many years, guided us with a conservative but nevertheless steady hand. And so I appreciate his input. If it's a bad idea, Robert, I'll take full accountability. I'll never mention your name in that context again. So that's my proposal. I very much favor everything the administration has come up with. I think they've done a wonderful job. I sit in the room, it reminds me of when I was in the private sector, and we'd sit in the room and try and figure out how many years we had all been in the business. And I sit in the room with these guys, and I'm looking at one guy who's been here for 30 years working on the budget, another guy who's worked in the nonprofit sector for almost his entire life. And I'm a guy who's done a lot of work with budgets in my life, and very significant budgets, but in a sector that likes to make money. And I quickly learned that the difference between a municipal budget and a private sector budget is very significant and not to be taken lightly. I learned some hard lessons in the first couple of weeks I was in this position. So I'll stop talking. Thank you for your patience, and I'll turn it back to Jim.
Okay, yep.
I sound terrible.
We're not quite line by line. So, all right. So what I'd like to do is, and Jim's, because Ben set up some possible moving targets there and where we could cover those things, and I want to make sure we get everyone's input. What I'd like to do is just at the very high level, because we don't want to get caught up in line items and all that, is look at the various sections related to expenses, and just so we're firmed up with the expense side, and then come back around to the revenue side to make sure we have it all supported. And so salary, with salaries, pensions, health insurance, there was a request from a couple of presentations 2 weeks ago as far as some additional personnel. I didn't feel like there was much appetite to do that. So I'm thinking we are firm with that line. This is line 14, which is all salaries and, okay. Then going down to our next section, which I think Jim explained some of the larger variances there, which the biggest one was department operating expenses, but that was related to a lot of the delivery of shared services, and there was an offset. And Pat has a question on that, so.
No, I want to go back. I didn't realize you were skipping. I thought you were going to go line by line, so.
No.
I still have a question about the health insurance, because I went back and looked in the large book, and, the last 3 years of the large healthcare cost center, it started at 1.76, it went to 1.57, and then it went down to 1.53 this year. And now, there's no correlation necessarily between that number and this number here, but in general, all healthcare is moving in the same direction at the same time. So why are we seeing such a dramatic swing from numbers that were going down for the last couple of years because of the employee contribution, and to a fairly significant increase this year, especially in light of the fact that it's the increase from the state was not that high compared to last year. In fact, I think it was less. Do you remember?
Jim?
On percent basis? I know we're adding some people,
You're
but,
talking about percent on the state health benefits?
yeah,
I think, for the calendar year of,
13?
13, or for 14, they announced the rates in August for 14. And municipals, I think it went up to somewhere between 6% and 10%.
Depends on,
I think they claim a blended rate is 7-8, but you have to go by your own
And also
experience.
retirees. So there was an increase, and a lot of folks expect that increase to be more significant this coming year as the Affordable Care Act really starts to implement. A lot of the costs are being driven up.
You're talking about for 2015, though. We already know what our rates are for
Well,
14.
but the rates did go up because of the Affordable Care, because they've implemented some aspects of it. That's one thing. I mean, healthcare costs have gone up. In the private sector, right now, they're up about 25%.
No, well, actually, mine are not up at all, but I understand that. But I'm just saying, just specifically in this case, last year's rates to this year's rates seem to be about in step. And our own experience was our costs were going down. I know we're adding some people, and there may be some people moving, but I'm sure every year we have some people move from one category to another. So why are we showing such a large increase given the decrease?
I think one of the things to keep in mind here is if you do shave it down based on experience, and then there's a hit in 2015, it's more difficult to absorb that
part I
hit.
understand also.
So basically what will happen could possibly, if all is great and, you know, the plans that people are in currently stay there, the people we hired had insurance from other sources and didn't take on new health insurance, is that we'd have more money flowing to the prior year surplus in 2015, which then could help with the cushion of the hit with the affordable.
They're anticipating a bigger increase for 2015. They announced this in August. So this coming August, we'll know what 2015 is. But generally, what happens is every 4 years, and I don't know why, but every 4 years, at a certain time, the SHBP, the State Health Benefit Plan, rates tend to be low that year. Then the year following elections, they tend to go back up.
So
on both sides, but I also think that a lot of people are anticipating some of the mandates coming out with the Affordable Care Act, because they keep on pushing it off. The 2015, you're going to see some very significant increases. And that'll be announced this coming August, effective January 1st.
One other question, when do our employees top out in terms of paying additional money?
It's tiered. So what happens is,
Fourth year.
if you had a contract that was in effect as of June 28th, 2011, you didn't pay until your contract expired. So for example, the firefighters' contract expired December 31st of 13. They're in Tier 1. Your police contract expired in, was it December 31st of 10? So they're going to be in Tier 1, right? Are they Tier 1? Are they Tier 3? So it varies over, but I think the vast majority of your employees are Tier 3 this year. They'll be Tier 4 January 1st of 15, except for the fire. They'll be Tier 2.
Okay, so we're still going to see cushioning of their increase next year.
Yeah, but the firefighters, I think, how many paid firefighters do you have in health benefits? 12? Yep. So it's not going to be a huge...
No, but you're saying everybody's going to be going to Tier 4 next year, so that means in 15, we're still seeing them paying an increased amount into the plan. Okay.
one of the things, Pat, is we saw some significant headcount reduction over 2011, 2012, going into 2013. We've now seen headcount increase in certain departments. So while the experience that you're seeing in terms of the actual numbers may reflect one thing, an employee that's brought in November of 2013 is not going to be reflected in that 1.53 number, but they will be reflected in the upcoming year. We've hired the additional police officers while having other police officers still on our books and while they're retiring and working through their accrued time. And we've had an increase in headcount, as discussed and mentioned before. And then finally, with the approach that we take is that we are cautious with this. Again, this money does not get spent on furniture or anything else. It falls directly to surplus. So this conservative approach, any savings that attempts to get gleaned through this type of action and not actually cutting an expense, but just trimming a line item, saying a line item is excessive, any action like that has a negative impact on surplus. And so, for example, if we were to cut that number back $100,000, my recommendation would be to cut down the use of surplus operating as a revenue on the top side by $100,000, because we're not finding a savings in an actual expense. For example, we're not finding a cheaper garbage contract, or we're not finding a cheaper healthcare plan. We're only trimming a line item that has cushion in it in case we needed to use it. Another great example would be snow, right? Snow removal. One year we used, last year, 2 years ago, we only used $20,000 of overtime in snow removal. This year, we're at $140,000 and climbing. Even small line items like, point out Liz's advertising budget. She's got a small $7,500 advertising budget. The past few years, she's only used $5,000 or $6,000. One could say, oh, well, let's cut that line item by $1,000 and we'll save the money. The problem is if this year we create a significant number of ordinances, Liz is going to need that money. I think it's actually a testament to the department heads that they have line items like Liz's advertising line item that's at $7,500, but she's not spending it down. And that's something that we've really worked hard on our department heads to say, look, you don't feel like you need to protect that line item by spending it down. We want to make sure that you have it and it's there when you need it, but if you don't need it, don't use it. So the cancellation of prior year's appropriations and the fact that they're not using those line items is a significant reason why we've been able to move from $2.5 million, as Thomas referenced a couple years ago, to $3.5 million as we believe a sustainable surplus number.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not asking you to cut it below last year's budget. I'm just asking you to take a harder look at the increase for this year.
Okay, so we can take that. I'm not too sure if there's any action right now as whether we want to cut it or leave it the way it is, so we make sure we have the cushion for coming years with the volatility of.
Well, I mean, I have so many other comments. That was just one
So-
of the other ones that's in there, so.
All right, so.
Some we have to circle back to
Yeah,
that.
so right now, we're leaving that whole section where it is, but if there's a need, there's the suggestion we cut the health insurance. The next section, I'm thinking is pretty straightforward. Jim explained line 17, which is the department operating expenses, utilities.
Sure.
Well, I don't know if there's any, because you explained, I think, is there any questions on anything on the next? I think we're pretty straightforward on the next
The only
section.
variance, because I know Mr. Rowe in his presentation that he gave to us late this afternoon was requesting that the legal stay the same. The reason legal's going up $10,000, it's a nominal amount, but this is a year where we have a lot of tax appeals. So we're anticipating needing additional money for tax appeals. It's appropriate to have a little bit of extra money to have counsel be able to defend the tax, so we keep the assessed values as high as possible. So the few extra dollars that are increased in legal are due primarily to our need for defending what we anticipate to be an inordinately large number of tax appeals this year.
And just a reminder, the cycle that it goes through is people saw their reassessed value, had a short time last year to challenge it, but they didn't have the full impact of what it meant to their property. So now they've got the reassessed value, they've paid the taxes for a year, and they're taking a whole different view. Plus, there's the business out there that someone represents one house in a neighborhood and says, you know, I just helped your neighbor save money, I can do the same for you. So all of a sudden, you have a bunch of cases that go through neighborhood like that. So we have a potential of a whole lot more challenges. Ben?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say, and I'll try for the politically correct way of saying this, but I think that we should have a cutoff level. I've said this before, that we don't bother discussing at a council meeting. I mean, you know, if you start talking about $10,000, I wish I had brought my sleeping bag. I mean, we're going to be here a long time, and the effect of that is inconsequential on a $29 million base. If there's a point to be made with regard to the philosophical outlook of this budget or some major components, well then, by all means, let's get on with it. But I just want to say, I'm not trying to cut off conversation. Everyone has been, everyone on council, and I've said it many times to residents, have been asked to provide questions to this group and so they could get them answered, and we'd all be making decisions based on full information. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that, because I did check several times after the last meeting when you said that you had many questions about the Black Book. I wanted to make sure that indeed those questions got answered, and people kept telling me that you didn't provide them with questions until a few days ago, and my understanding is they were all answered. So I'm not adverse to...
I don't want to... I asked them last week, and I got the answers this morning. So yes, I did get the answers. I'm not sure I agree with all of them, but I did get answers this morning.
All right,
so I'm
so
still processing them.
all I'm saying is if we go over the same ground again, you know, it's like the old joke, you can ask a question, the same question any way you want, but the answer's the same.
Well, actually, I didn't raise the legal issue. I actually just brought it up in anticipation of me.
It's
But
already
I'm not going to
decided.
argue about that.
Okay, and if there's a general feeling that we need to shave a large amount off of appropriations, well, then I would challenge administration to work on that, but, Carmela, did you?
Yeah, I just want to talk about the department operating expense. This is probably the highest number I've seen in a lot of years, okay? Because these departments have worked with a flat % increase for, I can't even remember how many years now. But included in this number is that, did you put $90,000 into this operating expense for the $90,000 we're going to need for David? For the overtime?
That's going to be,
Is it going into?
an increase in, go through.
So
the
we-
changes from this document,
Right.
which was issued February 11th to you, to a proposal based on the memo that David had, or that Robert had, and the suggestions that Mr. Wolkowitz has had over at when we're done going through this, where I would see those adjustments. So that those adjustments aren't taken into account yet.
Okay, can I just say one other thing besides that, you know, in case I don't get a chance later? As far as this overtime is concerned, this $90,000 is probably going to take care of what we've accrued so far. But with snow coming up again this week, you know, which is a nightmare to even think about, that probably means more overtime and whatever. Are we increasing his overtime budget to get us through the rest of the winter? I mean, March can be a nightmare sometimes, and that's what I'm concerned about, that, you know, David has to come hat in hand again and say, hey, guess what? You know, I need some more money for meals, I need some more money for overtime. I want to just make sure that he's going to have enough to get us through the wintertime without,
But we
yeah.
spoke to David about the 90,000 number.
Yeah.
He believes it's enough. It is not a Robert Califat typical, very conservative number. He rightly called it today when we were talking a thin number, but it's a number that we believe David can work with, that David has said he believes he can work with. And what ends up happening, and it's important for everyone to understand this, and I talked about this before, it's almost best to think of the appropriations as a spending plan. This is all we have, and what Councilwoman Vitale's bringing is a very important point, that if we don't have enough money in a particular line item, what do we do? How do we manage that? The state allows us to move money within David's budget. So if for some reason he doesn't need as much money on a different line item, we can move items within that. And you'll see that in the Black Book. Why was there a negative adjustment to the actual appropriation to the final? You actually see that in the Black Book. And so if we had struck the budget in March and then late April or May we had a bad snowstorm and we needed more overtime, what would we do? Right now we're able to correct it because we haven't struck the budget yet. We will be working with David in his budget. We have a $75,000 contingency line, and that's exactly what that's for. It's a very small amount, but it gives us the cushion. So when I mentioned to residents, and I think it's really important to think, this is not like a traditional business budget, where if you get more money in from construction code, we can go hire more construction code officials. Nope. We have to anticipate the impact of Chatham's operations on construction code within this budget and we have to make sure we have enough to cover the cost of that. Maybe we're being conservative, but it's appropriate to be conservative. Again, the money that we put aside for construction code, and that's one of the reasons why department operating budget is going up, it's being put aside because we need to be conservative. We'll have a year of experience, and then next year we'll be able to say, you know, we can be a little more aggressive. We can shave back on that number. And all of that will, obviously, as we talked about, come out in municipal surplus. We don't take money from the construction code and go buy furniture with it. We don't take money out of Liz's advertising budget and go buy something we don't
So
need.
Jim, just to related to the overtime and any other adjustments you were suggesting at this time, why don't you just cover those on the expense side, and we'll cover how they'll be funded.
So we have
Then we'll
a
come
couple
back
of
to you.
items that would be adjustments to the document that we issued February 11th that council has that is printed up this evening. One is the $50,000 that I referenced, and that's the net amount for additional overtime for David. David needs $90,000. We're going to redirect $40,000 of his money internally within the budget. We need to find a source for another $50,000. Robert and I feel comfortable that $50,000 can come from municipal surplus. So as you look at line one, will be if we approve the budget as Robert and I are going to be suggesting, there would be an additional $50,000 on line one added. So that $3.48 million would become $3.53. That $50,000 going to fund the municipal overtime for snow removal. In addition, there's one line item that is a net neutral zero line item. The Downtown Development Commission is now going to have a grant-funded program that the council's already pre-approved the grant. That needs to be added to both sides of the equation. So operating expenses will go up $110,000, but grants and state aid line 4 will go up by $110,000. So that's a net zero, but when we finally strike this budget, there'll be 110 added to both of those, so I don't want that to be any surprise. It's a net zero in terms of any sort of taxing impact.
And that'll be department operating expense on the expense
Correct,
side.
yep.
And the 50 overtime is to salary and wages.
Salary and wages, correct. And if you want me to, Robert and I did have conversations with Ben about his plan, and I can talk about how we would fund that plan.
Let's hold off on that part.
Okay.
Because that's kind of a little bit out of the,
So to circle back to the question that you had, Mayor, about the department operating budget and it going up by 9%, $200,000, a significant amount of that is being driven by the fact that our municipal court now has
actually, I was
additional
just confirming you already answered is
Oh, okay.
what I was doing. Yeah,
Okay.
thanks.
Stop talking.
So, yeah, Bob.
Okay, first I have a comment, and then I just have two questions. So what I'm hearing is, and just bear with me, we're trying to build a sustainable budget in a transition year, in a volatile market, while meeting the needs and requests of the residents. To that extent, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
God help us.
Got that?
All right. Quick question about surplus, and Ben, maybe, I know you did meet with, you talked to S&P.
Let's just hold on. I just want to, we'll circle back to surplus
Okay.
and just,
All righty.
yeah.
Okay, then let me just jump down to the capital, is that okay?
Actually, we're going to go there. If we're fine with subtotal for lines 15 through 20, we will,
I just have one question maybe for Jim, and that is it possible to then identify for the operating expense, how much of it's being driven by things outside the ordinary run-of-the-mill? You know, you mentioned the increase because of the joint court. We're now going to add the DDC. We're also going to add David's overtime. There was, I think, some other one-time things.
Yeah, okay.
it might be
Because
helpful.
my comment was on this, you know, that budget should we should be trying to increase it at the same rate. Along those lines, I had also asked you some questions about where the corresponding revenue was in the revenue budget, and we're not up there, but I don't know if we're going to circle back, but I did notice that some of the revenue items have been increased, like the joint court, but the shared service we have with Chatham and the other one for IT, we're not reflecting those revenue increases, although we are showing the increases in expenses in that departmental budget.
Yeah, most of those, by statute, if I'm correct, can't be recognized until next year because we don't have any history with permits and all that with Chatham, so.
So we're allowed to increase the joint court.
Because it's a contract.
Okay,
But,
So the Chatham contract we have is not a fixed dollar amount. The Chatham contract we have is we get all the construction code fees.
so if a realogy was built in Chatham, there would be a major boost to that number way out of it. But we can't, if we even knew that a Realogy was going to be built in Chatham, we can't go ahead and budget this year. We would know that next year there would be a boost because those permit fees come in later on.
And so then, within our revenue budget, there's a lot of items, and some of them are kind of like lowballed year after year, some are not. So, I mean, we do have some flexibility within some of these other line items where we have history to raise them if we need to reflect some of these other things in advance of them coming in, because a lot of what we seem to do is, both on the revenue side and the expense side, anticipate the worst and then just have it roll into the following year as additional surplus. And one of the challenges is always trying to get a true picture of what really our expenses and what our revenues are in a given year, as opposed to trying to keep leapfrogging. Even the money we talked about, the $300,000 extra that's coming in from the extra uncollected, or the great collection rate we had, there's going to be a corresponding loss next year in, back taxes that we typically would collect. And so to the extent that we can smooth that out, it would be helpful.
Yeah. And one of the things I had suggested over the years is to look at these, and we jump up to the revenue side, but which I said we wouldn't do yet, but just looking primarily at line 2, municipal sources, is looking at that as a rolling 2-year number, in that whether it's permits or anything, we recognize a certain amount in year 1, we recognize the balance in year 2, and it just keeps going like that. So it does have a leveling effect. So I think that somewhat addresses that concern. So just finishing off the on the expense side, we're good through line 21. Lines 23, we're good with that, because that is debt service. Line 24, revaluation note, that's set. So the capital improvement, we have talked about that. We've already approved half of that. So, and there was a suggestion of reducing that number by 500,000. So I'm just, get consensus on, are we at 3.5 or where are we on that?
Can I just ask you about the revaluation note payment? You have it extended out here to 2015. When do we finish paying it?
Last year's
That's it?
2015.
Hey, okay.
Yep. Bob?
80,000 is 80,000?
2016.
2016?
Okay.
Okay, Bob?
In regards to capital improvement, I know that, a number of residents came in here and they needed their streets redone, and that is over almost 50% of that number. To be clear, the remainder of that number, and I know we talked about it at several meetings, a lot of this is infrastructure repairs that we've discussed, as well as a need to replace aging equipment, which is a safety issue to our workers in town, correct? I mean, it was pretty much itemized at how we got to that 3.5.
Yeah, we had a line item discussion on.
Right.
And when the departments came up, there were some questions about their capital requests.
Right, and if I recall, some of them, to even get it down to that number, extended the useful life of some of their equipment, just to kind of come in at that number, when the reality is maybe they shouldn't have. Okay, thank you.
Pat?
So I guess I might as well comment on it at this point. My rationale for this is really going back to the beginning, which is, I might as well pull out my sheet. I'm going to read through this because it's the only way to get to where I need to get to. When I looked at this budget, I've been doing this for about 6 weeks now, and been looking at a lot of the small numbers and the totals, and I finally said, let me go back and think about what it is I was hoping to achieve in this budget. So I put together kind of like my budgeting principles. The first, and it's something I've been talking about for over a year, which everybody knows, please set aside money for an electric rate cut before any additional money is spent in 2014. Between 2006 and 2010, the cost of purchasing electricity increased by over $8 million, and this increase was passed along 100% to the residents. We are expecting our annual cost to drop by about $5 million, and I feel we should be carving out at least $1 million of that savings for our residents on an annual basis. Obviously, this year would be a partial year. And if we needed to be conservative and hold off on doing it until next year, I think we need to at least be prepared to set aside the money that it would take to do that. And one of the concerns I have about the size of the capital budget, as I took a look at it is going to consume all the money. And when Jim put together the 2015 budget that he added about a week and a half ago, I think it became even clearer to me that that was going to happen. The second was an operating budget that grows at or near a sustainable rate, about 2%. Obviously, there's going to be special items. That's why it'd be helpful for us if some of this stuff was identified, so you could see what is the normal run rate and what are the adds, and then we can sort of evaluate them. When you see 9%, and with the additional 50,000 that we're going to be adding for David, you're now talking about an 11% increase in the operating expenses for this year. A substantial yet sustainable capital budget. I know we've fallen behind on our funding of the capital budget. We need to return to a level of funding we saw a decade or so ago, a minimum of at least $2 and $2.5 million per year. I did go back, and I think, Ben, you got a copy of this, Jim got a copy. I broke apart the table that was given to us as part of the rationale for why we should be looking at $3.5 million, and it was the historical spend from 2000 or so until about 2013. And I think at the time it was advertised at about 3.9 million average. But when I went and looked and you stripped out things like the Hartley Dodge Memorial, when you stripped out the public safety building, which are big one-time spends, and they're also, we borrow that money. It's not coming out of any of our ongoing operating budgets. The actual average was closer to $2 to $2.25 million, and even some of that, I think, was borrowed money. I know that the fund balance that we're currently spending was borrowed money, and I think that those projects might have been baked in there at one point, because there were some fairly large sewer projects, and I can't believe that that came out of an operating budget or the electric utility. The fourth item was a minimal increase in the transfer of money from the utility surplus to fund the operating budget. We have to look at the past decade to see what happens when we transfer greater and greater amounts from the utilities to support growth in the operating budget. I'm saying operating, not capital. It sets us up for real financial trouble when the cost of wholesale power increases, which it will eventually, and we'll have to make large cuts in services as well as dramatically raise electric rates. In the past, it's also had a great impact on property taxes, but the current 2% cap may eliminate that option to preserve services in the future. And finally, the general cutting electric versus property taxes. I don't believe we should be using the electric utility to provide property tax cuts. For many, it's a net loser, but more importantly, with our tax levy increases capped at 2%, artificially lowering taxes today will hurt us tomorrow. So those are the general ideas I had when I looked at putting together an alternative. And I gave that to everybody. Specifically for the capital fund, I dropped it down because, again, I think that we are significantly above where we were years ago, even at the highest in terms of our average. So I think even $3 million is a fairly significant contribution. I also looked at the capital spend plan that we got, and actually it was only good for about 3.5 years at $3.5 million, and then it kind of flattened out. So it said to me, we can't even sustain that, or at least we haven't figured out how to sustain it. So why not spread it out a little and reserve some of that money for an electric rate decrease? So those were where I was. That's how I got to where I was with that, and I guess I can comment on the rest of this as we get to it.
Jim, just, yeah.
Say one thing quick, and I
Sure.
appreciate what Pat was saying in regard to capital. If you took 225,000, you talked about an average from 2000 to 2013 of 2.25 if you back out some of the bigger items. $225,000 capital budget in anywhere from the year 2000 to 2006 equated to somewhere between 12 and 15% of the total budget. This year, a $3.5 million capital budget equates to only a little less than 12%. So on a percentage basis, if you take that into account, and obviously costs go up, the budget's gone up, it's more in line. So looking at it nominally and dividing it over 15 years is one way to look at it, but there's a different way to look at it. And then the second is truly needs-based. And we look at the capital budget that we have for the next few years, and yes, I don't think our estimates are great going out the fourth and fifth year. This was the first time in a few years we've done a 5-year plan. Our focus was really making sure we at least had the first few years in line properly, but if you just add up the total number of roads we have, the assets, and the maintenance that's required, and the increase in costs that we're seeing, obviously increase in oil and gas costs plays out in blacktop costs. All those things are what drove drove us to have a number of 3.5 million. Honestly, it could have been 4 million or more. We obviously had to shave back on the library and many of the other expenses the department heads were hoping, and that's where we ended up with 3.5 million.
Yeah, I think we'll come back to you, Pat, because other people have
Okay.
comments. Just a couple of things to keep in mind is, as Jim just mentioned, some things have been pushed and pushed. During a lot of time that you spoke of, there was the talk of the 20-year road program, but we were actually funding it on a 30-year basis. So that was a challenge, and that's why we have doing some catch-up on some major roads at this point. Ben, and then Bob, and then Carmella, I think we're lined up. So.
Actually, the point I was going to make is the one Jim made, but I'll just enhance it a little bit. I think in order to understand where we are and where we're coming from, you have to think in terms of ratios in the budget. Absolute numbers can be misleading, and they are. Our budgets, for better or worse, have been climbing at a fairly constant rate, and the ratios, therefore, of many of these things, like I mentioned, the reserves for uncollected taxes, are remarkably constant. Where we fell off the wagon was in the 4-year period where we not only had surplus coming out of our electric utility that we could apply to capital and to operating, but on top of it, we were eating into our surplus to maintain operations. That was a bad situation. But if you take that out of the picture, the feeling I get is that what we're trying to do is go back to the salad days, right? We're going back to a period where we had a utility. Do we have this utility because it kicks off money that we can use in our operating and capital needs? Or do we have a utility so we can have the lowest rates in New Jersey? I mean, that's a discussion that's important, and I think we should have it at some point. But I think insofar as this year's concerned, it's not the time to set that track because, as Jim said, we're really feeling our way. It's a new world for us. But having said that, we're still a surprisingly conservative and consistent town when you look at ratios.
Thank you, Ben. Bob?
Okay, and this is where I kind of diverge a bit from maybe Ben and Jim a little bit here. Ratios are good and statistics are good to a point. And maybe that is, just kind of see where we were, and I get that. But this year, what we did is we really listened to all the residents, and we listened very closely to the department heads. And what we have, I think, here is what I would call a budget based upon, reality, hard facts. I mean, the residents asked for work that needed to be done. We recognized it and we reflected it in the budget. The department heads came to us and said, look, guys, this is what we need to do our job and to do it safely, and that's what's here. The other information that was brought out about, the health insurance and the pension, I mean, these things are regulated. We have very little control over that. We all wanted to hire additional workers. Well, you know what? You're going to pay for it, and you're seeing it in the budget right now. Those are hard facts, and that's what I appreciate about this budget, that it's not so much ratio and statistic based, it's more based on hard facts. And, we heard it at town hall meetings, we heard it at the presentations here.
Carmella, did you?
Yeah, I'm looking at two pieces of paper here. And the capital improvement fund is reduced by about $500,000 on this one. I think one of the things that we really talked about this year was getting the roads done. And it's a fairly aggressive program that I think that everybody sitting on this council should be proud of. What I have found over the years, and I've sat here before, and what I have found is department heads in this town and employees want to do the best that they can for Madison. So when I look at operating expenses, kind of going up to 8.99, we have no control over what happened to any of us this year with the snow and whatever. But I have to agree with Bob that this has been a tremendous amount of work that's been done by the administration and with Robert Califoot on this budget. I am not in favor of reducing the capital improvement fund whatsoever. I think what we're doing this year is absolutely necessity. It's not even anything on there is a want list. It's an absolute necessity. So, you know, I will continue to say that I think that this is a good budget. I think that department heads have done a very good job in watching what they're spending and what they're doing. So that's all I want to say about that.
Okay, Pat, and then back to Ben.
I mean, again, last year we spent $1 million on the capital improvement fund. I'm suggesting we spend $3 million. That's a tripling of our capital improvement fund, and I think at that rate, we can sustain it through the next several years. I also, you know, something Jim said, which is, you know, we could keep going, and that is kind of my fear, is that people had to pay extra for electric. They had to pay extra in taxes, as, you know, we were in the unfortunate situation of having to, you know, pick up a bigger contract. So we kind of stabilized a lot of things over that time. Now that we're seeing a fairly significant savings, and this is something I discussed with people over the last almost year as I walked around town, you know, people are expecting to be able to see some of the back. I mean, some people said to me, why aren't we giving it all back? And I said, well, because we have some serious needs. I do support, as I said, a fairly significant increase in the capital fund, but I do think we need to look at carving out a piece to save residents some significant money. And that's really, you know, one of the first things I looked at, and as I said, I looked forward at the 2015 budget, and I can see where, unless things break in our favor tremendously, there's not going to be any money next year either, and then that means going forward, there's not going to be anything. And once we get to the point where that becomes sort of baked in, when rates do go up, we're going to have to be raising rates after not having dropped them when our costs dropped. And we may have to also then cut back on some other things because we've got a fairly, you know, aggressive budget here.
Ben?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that one of the points that Councilman Rowe raised, I appreciate his raising it because I neglected to mention it myself, and I very much agree with him that a zero increase in municipal taxes is totally unsustainable. I mean, it would be irresponsible for councils next year or the year after or whenever to think of that as some sort of mandate to continue taxes at the current level. Given that we work with a 2% cap, that would be, it would be long-term a problem of major proportion. It's the one reason that I had self-doubts about proposing it. But I'd like to think that councils in the future will feel independent enough to not feel bound by our decisions. And I will add, by the way, that in 2000, when the tax rate went absolutely down, it was shortly thereafter followed by a very significant increase. So those councils didn't feel bound by a decision that was made in a given year, and I hope we don't.
And certainly, as Ben has shared his ideas with a zero, I've been constant saying, I want to know what the impact is on the future years, because we shall not do that without a look forward. I think we're about ready to move forward. I don't hear a strong feeling of cutting the 500,000. I do hear from one person, but
well, I did put Rob's name on this because the two of us discussed this, and he asked me to represent his case. So you effectively have two votes.
Yeah. So, but I do want to say, related to electric rates, I've often said that this utility we have that we're blessed with is, you know, owned in a way by the residents of Madison, and the stock dividends are not paid in checks. It's paid in support by capital projects and support to operating, because I am very strongly opposed to ever charging anything that is below market. That said, it's tough to define the market. JCP&L sets a very, they're at the low end of the market, and right now they're being told their rates are too high because they're not providing the services that warrant even what they're charging right now. So if we're going to do anything, we need to do our homework, which is why we're doing strategic planning, so we can go forward and set rates that are appropriate. And, you know, the transfers that happen have to be at a level where we can absorb the worst of times and you know, reap the best of times. But It has to be safely done. The next section, the joint meeting that's what it is. That's our actual number at this point, right? Library is statute plus the decision to support their electric rate. That was a shift from when we went to not charging them to charging them, and to soften the blow to them. So that's where that number comes from, reserved for tax appeals. We've talked about the bump we're going to have in this year, so we'll talk about the funding for that. So that, and then the reserve for uncollected taxes, I think we've already covered that, but Pat?
So we're going to circle back and do revenue, because if not, at this point, I might as well put on the table my other recommendation which was the line that says Realogy is the money that we're receiving, or we received last year in excess of, or I forget what Jim called it, added taxes. And my goal was, one of the ways to move money, take less money out of the electric utility rather, was to utilize that money. It's a perfect match, given that, one of our biggest issues is when we get hit with tax appeals, we own 100% of the refunds. In this case, when we got the extra money from Realogy, we own 100% of it. It's a one-time event, as more or less will be the reserve for tax appeals rather. I know we're expecting a possible smaller number for next year, but it seemed to me that that was another way to preserve some of the money in the electric utility so that we could, again, look at reducing rates.
And certainly, in a way, it's how you label it, but when we get to the revenue side, we can look at how doing it. But it certainly makes, you win some, you lose some. Tax appeals, you lose, you got to pay out potentially $400,000. And an early, mid-year rateable that comes online, that's a plus. So what you say there makes a lot of sense to me, but it's, it is moving one thing to another, and so it may not make an overall difference, but it come up there. But I agree. Your marking is fine by me. Any other thoughts on the bottom of the page? We'll go to the top and we'll just knock off line number 4. We're not getting any more, and we'll be happy to get the same amount from the state.
We'll be lucky. So I'm sorry, do you want comments on all the revenue, or are you going to go line by line?
Prior year surplus, we just moved that up by 50,000, which was to fund the overrun on snow removal, and we're comfortable with the source. That 50,000 is a good number to put in there.
The one question I have, Jim, is, and can you update where we stand with the municipal surplus? If we're going to take more money out for that and anything else, so that we can see where the overall surplus balances are going? Thanks.
Want to do that now?
No, just for the next meeting.
And just the 3.53 includes the 400,000 of Realogy. Would that be?
Say that again, Mayor?
In the prior year surplus?
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
So if, and the concept that
Okay,
Pat has
that's right,
of
because
using.
this was older, yeah.
Yeah, this is an older document. So the concept that Pat has of using $400,000 in additional municipal surplus, it's not a municipal source as you have on your document, Pat, or it kind of looks like that on yours. It's really a surplus line, but we understand it. That's really just one pocket or the other. Are we going to take that $400,000 from, that we need for reserve for tax appeals? Are we going to take it from the electric utility? That's what the administration had proposed before the Realogy one-time shot came in, or are we going to take it from municipal sources? One or the other is okay. It's just important to recognize that in either case, it's a one-shot. So if you were to choose to not take that from the municipal electric utility and take it from municipal operating instead, that $400,000 that's extra in the electric utility, it's an extra that's in there one time.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen again next year.
And the 400,000 below will not be an annual. I'm certainly, I don't know how others are, but I'm comfortable with increasing that line to reflect the Realogy. This is the prior year surplus would go up to include the amount from Realogy that wasn't came up after further review of these numbers, and if it's not there now, it would be there next year. Pat?
Yeah, the other concern I had, and this is when I saw Jim's 2015 budget, when you look at the electric surplus operating for 2014, it's 4.15 million. And that was supposed to include $400,000 for one-time costs of the reserve for tax appeals. But when you get to the next year, we build upon that higher base. And that's why I really wanted to take that number down by $400,000, because you forget about that from year to year. That 4.15 million was artificially high or increased to cover one thing. Now it suddenly becomes part of our general operating revenue. And that's where I start to have a real issue with it. And that's why I would prefer to use the reallogy money as part of the municipal surplus being applied, lower that money and keep it in the electric utility, and then base next year's operating pull on that lowered number.
Yeah, and I agree that I would like to see a more consistent, on the operating side from electric, a more consistent number, with the capital being able to fluctuate a little bit depending on good times and bad. Other thoughts along those? Looks like they're having a little confab, so maybe there'll be more to come on that.
No, the only thing I would add is, I mean, at this point, and I understand why everyone has said what they did, and I respect it, but at this point, it's very subjective, right? It's kind of, I don't like the way it feels, or it's a big number, and that's meaningful. You have to trust your gut, absent anything else. I'm just hoping that by the end of this year, we have something else.
Yeah.
And that's the strategic planning ratios that I believe they'll be producing.
Yeah, and when the administration rolled out this budget, they talked about basically the 4.1 was a sustainable number. And I don't know if Jim,
Yeah, yes, I think it's a sustainable number, and we're kind of, the 2015 was, the purpose of creating the 2015 was mostly to show council the challenge of continuing to fund general capital of $3.5 million once the one-shots that we have this year are gone away, which are the sale of property and the general capital fund balance.
But Jim,
So it was
in your memo to us, you also indicated that you're already starting to be concerned about the drawdown on the electric surplus account. So leaving another $400,000 there actually gives us more of a cushion, especially if we want to be more conservative, given that we don't know what May 1st is going to bring us. And that was the other thing I looked at, and we discussed a little of that this afternoon.
My memo in regard to that was more a concern about having a rate reduction this year and a general large impact that would have on operating, and not really knowing, as the mayor talked about, what the future is going to look like in the municipal or in the electric utility operating. So it was really more driven towards that. It was 2015. Some of the numbers here are certainly going to change. And we talked about reserve for tax appeals possibly changing. There's a lot of moving parts in there. The main part of even having an exercise, and we never really do this, is to show where we're going to fund capital in 2015 if we're going to try to keep at that sustainable level.
okay, so we've talked about,
I also want to say I had a sidebar conversation because, Pat, your document came out pretty late this afternoon. In terms of this document here, Pat, came out pretty late. I didn't get a chance to talk to Robert about that 400,000, about whether we take it from municipal surplus or take it from the electric utility. Right now, we have it embedded in the electric utility. Robert brings up an excellent point. It would take a lot of explaining to S&P as to why we would be going from $3 million to $4 million in use of surplus. Number one. Number two, if we were to do that, which I can understand Robert's point that it's probably not a good idea to do it, if we were to do that, we would have to be in lockstep and recognize that next year that number has to come back to the sustainable dollar amount. I would much prefer to, as you said, with the electric utility, with all of these line items, try to zero in on a sustainable revenue amount, surplus of hopefully 3.5, and electric utility operating of hopefully about 4.2, 4.3. So there's actually some good logic to keep it the way it is that we currently have it here with that money, that 400,000 coming out of electric utility.
Yeah, but again, that really means you're using the excuse this year of taking the money out for the tax reserve and building upon that for next year's budget with that money. And that I do have a real concern about.
but it does sound like a valid point of some of it is presentation, and it is certainly how.
I'm not going to argue that point. And, again, the other thing I'm starting to get concerned about is that, if I'm S&P, I want to see a sustainable operating budget based on what's going on within here, not relying on the electric utility. And as I look at this budget and sort of the guess for next year, we're starting to rely more and more on the electric utility to run the borough's budget. And that was the other big concern I have. And if I'm S&P, that's going to bother me at some point.
Yeah, so I'm not too sure if relying it more and more is the accurate, certainly there was a drop because of the contract we were in, but historically, probably as percent basis, this is probably not too far off from.
Well, I mean, we're going to be using, all our capital money's coming out of the electric utility, so you can't even compare year over year. And this year, we're raising it by almost 12%, the money we're pulling from the operating budget, and we're saying that even though part of it's a one-time, in fact, almost all of it's one-time, next year, we're going to build on top of that and then possibly need another 4%. That, to me, is, we're starting to get back to, if you go back and look at what happened 5 or 6 years ago, we were starting to get into that category with how much money we were taking out from, in terms of running the operating part of the budget from the electric utility, and we suffered because of that.
Ben?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, again, one of the things to do is to go back and consider how much we're taking out of the electric utility relative to how much the electric utility has made in surplus, and also compare it to the overall size of the budget. I don't disagree, these are big numbers, but I think proportionally they may be touching toward the higher end of the range historically, but they're not blowing through it. And we unfortunately, I mean, I'd love for us not to do this, but I don't know which projects you tell people they can't have until next year. And that's the difficulty I have with trying to cut the appropriation to capital.
I can't say that I can make that judgment, that we'd have to rely on the administrators to tell us if we were going to, drop it down. And actually, that's on whether we're going from 3.5 to 3. What we're talking about now isn't going to impact the cost or the amount of money we're spending on the capital budget. That would still stay at 3.5. We're just really talking about where we're taking the money from. So
No, I understand
that conversation's already been had and decided.
All right, just,
No, I mean, obviously, there's no sense pursuing it, but I mean, one of the ways to do that is to cut capital by the amount of money you want to, right?
No,
that you want to put aside.
no, for this particular issue, I'm just simply saying, use the reallogy money rather than taking that extra, some of the money that's coming out of the electric utility for operating, just lower the number by 400. I initially said 8, but now I'm saying, since that decision's been made, I'm still looking for people to consider that, especially for the long-term health of our operating budget and relying more and more on the electric utility.
Yeah, I just want to say, I don't view this as a long-term thing. I mean, we went through the capital projection needs, and it appears that we've got 3 years of a lot of catching up to do. And after that, it should be over. I mean, to show you where we are relative to each other, when I heard about the reallogy money, one of my first thoughts was we had to put it toward capital. Because we're so inundated with these requirements, we're talking in the neighborhood of shade over 10 million over the next 3 years. And that doesn't assume we move up Prospect, which is on the list 4 years away. And I don't know about you, but I drive Prospect. If that thing lasts for 4 years, maybe 4 months, but not 4 years.
Certainly the reason postpone it was because it's potential state aid, but I think we certainly would be open to looking at between Kings Road and Main Street as or something might take on sooner. But anyway, since line 9 is very important in all these decisions as far as what the amounts are, and Ben, you had suggested the possibility of a 0, which would mean shaving 170,000.
Yes, that is correct.
So how would you?
Yeah, one source would be the pilot money that I mentioned earlier on. So that takes care of 36,000. We've discussed a number of ways we could deal with this, and I think given the conversations we've had tonight, what I propose is that as part of the revised budgets, we have budgets. So in other words, I would include a budget that shows 0 and where that gets paid off from. Because I want to think about some of the things that have been said and see if we can accommodate them and still achieve some of the objectives.
Yeah, it's just our goal is to introduce at our next meeting.
Yes.
Which would be difficult if we don't have a pretty much a finish line outside of these adjustments we've called right now. Is it?
So I'm confused. Where's the under 134,000 coming from?
Robert and I had discussed that, and 36,000 would increase in line number 2, and
So you're taking 36,000 additional municipal surplus?
yeah.
Okay.
no,
From municipal sources.
It's a revenue.
Oh, okay, so Ben already mentioned that, okay.
Yeah, FDU pilot just drops into line 2. That's money that we talked about hasn't been allocated yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then, since it's not a very large amount, Robert and I were willing to concede that an additional 67,000 from municipal operating, an additional 67,000 from electric utility surplus operating would be used to allow for a one-time, as Ben said, and I would reinforce that, 0% tax increase. And I think that 0% tax increase plus the increase in assessed values would be a meaningful impact to the residents this year, and seeing their actual, probably nominal taxes hopefully stay flat or go down.
So again, prior year surplus, up 50 for snow removal, plus the, what? 67, thank you. Good to see you're keeping score at home. Municipal sources, up 110 from the Main Street Foundation transfer, plus 36 from pilot.
Correct. Actually,
well, no, the
100
grant- is 110 in grants?
goes under grants, Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Number-
yeah, thank you,
line
that is
4.
correct, yep.
Could you repeat
That's
that?
where
I'm
I had it.
sorry.
Could you start
Yeah,
again,
one more
please?
time.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, you.
Let's skip the line numbers.
1, $50,000 increase on prior year operating surplus to fund the overtime.
Right.
67,000 to fund the 0% tax increase proposed by Mr. Wolkowitz. Number 2, municipal sources, that would increase by $36,000. That's recognizing the FDU pilot payment. No, line 4, $110,000 increase. That's the grant funds that come in to fund the DDC operating, which it's a wash. It ends up on the other end as well. On the bottom line on line 17. And line 6, electric utility surplus operating, that would increase by 67. That would be the second portion that would get us to a 0% tax increase this year.
Okay. I mean, your schedule is well taken. The one thing I wanted to talk about was these 2 accounts that we were taking equal amounts out of. But
Okay, yeah.
I'm fine with what's just been said as a solution to this, assuming everyone else is. I mean, in both cases, I don't think they're huge numbers.
No, they're not, but, I've already made my point about taxes versus electric, and again, we're just moving money from one place to another to get to 0, and I just can't support that.
Okay.
Other thoughts?
Your prerogative. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the only, my one thought is there, for the Standard & Poor's review, if we increase this prior surplus to 100, we're talking almost $200,000 if we throw in the other 67 and the 50. So it's just, going, the 3.5 we're at basically right now for prior year operating surplus. We're at adding 117,000 for the 2 lines. The other thing is, what if the electric stayed and you added the other 67 there? What is the pluses and minuses of those 2 options?
I mean, if I'm Standard & Poor's, I'm going to wonder why,
Yeah,
you're
well,
dragging $500,000 out of the electric utility to support the operating budget. It's going to be another, I don't know, 13, 14% now?
I mean, I can't speak for S&P. They change staff on a regular basis, but the last time we did this, they took us from double A to double A plus to triple A. To triple A plus, and so we've been doing it all along. They didn't seem to mind it then.
Yeah.
They may mind it now because, as they say, the heads change, but there's nothing in their operating philosophy that, as it pertains to the borough, that would suggest they'd have problems with it. I just didn't catch your numbers.
So it was just a matter of what are the pluses and minuses of funding it 100% through prior year surplus and the pilot versus splitting that. So is there?
I would defer to Robert on that. We both thought that splitting it in half and taking a little from each was better than taking from one or the other. I am sensitive to Mr. Rowe's comment about trying to maintain a level amount taken from the electric utility. We can look back as early as 12 years ago, in 2011, we took out $5 million out of the electric utility. It was only a $19 million budget. So now we're talking about taking out not quite that much this year. No, I'm sorry, a little more.
A little more,
But a much larger budget as a percentage. And we did have a AAA rating back during that time. So it's a balance. But I am very sensitive to what Mr. Rowe is saying in
So
terms of
just
blocking it.
a second. Robert, we can't really have a sub,
Time's gonna go right through the roof.
thank you for that clarification.
That budget
You have to rebudget that.
The budget's gonna be done in
10,000.
3 more meetings, so.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right, Jim.
I just want to say I am very sensitive to what Mr. Rowe is saying about making sure the operating surplus and electric utility is managed and maintained. So I think that needs to be something that's going to be discussed at the strategic planning level with Mr. Barbado and with Mr. Bintinger, and I think we'll be coming back hopefully later on in the year with some clear guidance on that, because we need to have kind of the 10 commandments on these things to keep sustainability in the forefront of revenue.
All right, any other comments on, and then I'll see if we have a motion to, so on the expense side is $160,000 worth of adjustments, 50 on salary, wages, and 110 department operating. And on the revenue side, I'm holding off on the last part of it, there's a 50,000 adjustment on prior year surplus to fund the salaries, the 110 on state aid and grants that offsets the operating there, and whoever is willing to make a motion, I'll leave it to you to figure out whether 67 is, or the 134 is split or one location.
One other question, Ben, you mentioned something about another program where you wanted to take another $100,000 out of the electric utility. Is that something that's going to be discussed after the budget, or you want it to be part of this budget?
That's a good question. How do you want to handle that?
That would be the final piece of adjustment, Mayor, and in the conversations that I had with Mr. Wolkowitz, those funds would come out of electric surplus operating. That obviously can be a one-time program, it can be a pilot program, it doesn't have to be a sustaining program. So that would be an additional revenue of $100,000 that would come out of electric surplus to fund that program. It's likely that we won't use nearly that amount because it'll take a number of months before we can even develop and launch that program.
Yeah, pardon me. I think it's a timing issue, though. So you'd want it included as part of the budget presentation at the next meeting.
Yeah, and I would.
I think that makes sense. But I just wanted to clarify that.
Robert, please step to the.
Ben and Jim, we had a prior discussion about this. If the $100,000 is going to be in the form of a rebate, it doesn't come out of surplus, we have to put it in the budget as an appropriation to spend
That's what I was about to say. That makes, it is a new line of business. Either an I think it's new line of business in the electric utility,
The electric utility.
yeah.
The electric utility, actually, so
Yes.
there'd be no impact on this. We
Yeah,
keep
that's
that
fine.
totally within the
Okay.
electric
That is
utility.
correct.
Correct. So there would be no impact on this municipal budget with that, Mayor. It's going to stay within the electric utility.
Yeah, also, just to follow up on Mr. Burnett's point, we estimate 3 to 4 months before this gets going, after it's approved. Administrative stuff. But on the other side of it, I've asked several times and gotten the same answer. The administrative costs of this program would be minimal because the information exists. It's just the question of having someone look through it.
And Mayor, there are two other adjustments that are in the body of this memo. We would be reducing the Public Works snow removal vehicle rental from $25,000 down to $5,000, and we would be reducing the recreation part-time help from $32,000 down to $12,500.
So those are some shifts from, some is within the salary line, some is,
Shifts
yeah.
within salary,
So,
so it doesn't change the dollar amounts here, but Robert's recognizing
Okay,
how
yeah.
we're getting to 90,000
The
for
part-time budget and recreation. So I have to amend the answer you gave me about keeping the 32,000 in the recreation for part-time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Get it out of there one way or the other.
Okay.
I did, but.
So I have the authority to deliver a zero budget increase.
Well, we're about to do a motion, and then you will have that. Or maybe you won't. We'll find, stay
Yeah,
tuned.
maybe you won't.
All right,
Would you want me to make that
Sure.
motion?
sounds good.
This is going to be a wording challenge, but let me, would you like to do it? No. Okay. All right, I have a motion that the 2014 municipal budget reflect a property tax increase of 0%.
I'll second that.
And do we
We
need
have
to,
include
do we need a motion on the other
The other
adjustments,
portion?
or that
The
just?
other adjustment as well?
So you're going to be adopting
They-
that?
That's, okay, yeah, yeah, that'll be adopted, yeah, so that's the, yep.
Consensus will.
So we have consensus on the others, and it's the motions on the table of a 0%. Discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to support a 0% tax increase. But again, I've raised my concerns about that and how we're funding it. And again, I think we're just moving money from one place to another. In fact, we're moving a lot of money from one place to another. I don't think it's the right thing to do. So again, I am greatly supporting saving our residents money. It's just in a completely different way. And I think that this is going to drop by $172,000 over what we were expecting. I was hoping to do something more in the order of $500,000 this year.
$2 million, what?
Electric rate cut.
Oh, electric rate cut.
Yes.
Wow.
Other, any other comments?
I don't think this is terribly relevant at the moment, but in looking at, and I just think we ought to do this going forward, if you look at the concentration of revenue, the 50 top payers in electric utilities account for some 40-odd% of the total, whereas the top 50 property taxpayers account for something closer to 12%, which means if for every dollar you reduce electric utilities, the vast number of us, absent the top 50, are sharing 60%. If you take the same amount out of property taxes, we're sharing 88 cents. Now, I know there's a tax issue, but if you compare it, and we've done that, you're talking some pretty high marginal rates to make those two equivalent. And given the nature of taxes, the impact is greater the less money you have. And the less, I'm sorry, the lower is your tax bill, the greater is the impact by using a reduction in property taxes as opposed to electric rates. But as I said much earlier, I would hope we find the day that we're doing both.
So a couple comments. Obviously, even if you were doing $500,000 across the board, it would have a greater impact even on the residents than $170,000 would. But you can target the rate cuts on the electric side, whereas with the property tax rate, you have to uniformly apply it. So I think we have some options on the electric side. It's also where we're generating the money. You know, we're not cutting this budget in any way, in any meaningful way. In fact, we're raising it pretty significantly. So to say that we're going to cut property taxes at the same time we're greatly increasing our expenses across the board, it just doesn't connect for me. I tend to look at things from a management standpoint, and to me, we're better off addressing the savings where it's being generated, and that's in the electric utility. It's not being generated on the municipal budget side.
I just want to emphasize I'm not adverse to that. I just don't think this is the right year. And maybe it's my soft spot, but I'm really looking to the people of this town who need this benefit the most. And I think this is the right way to do it.
Bob,
Yeah.
it's a B word.
Yeah, it's a B word. You know, I'll go back to something Jim said before. I'm not apt to want to spend money on something I don't have yet. We haven't seen the savings in the electric rates. We don't know if we will. You know, you listen to the news right now, gasoline prices are going up, natural gas is going up. You don't know what's going to happen. I'd rather see the savings first and then apply it as opposed to giving the money away before we actually realize it.
Pat, and then I'll give
Well,
last chance to anyone
I was going to say, we
else.
better see the money because we're spending it. I mean, the money, the budget we're putting together now, where we're pulling all this money out of the electric utility, is in anticipation of those rates, or I'm sorry, our costs coming down. If they don't, the electric utility is not going to be in good shape next year, so.
Yeah, but then we also have the option of postponing some projects that we had talked about. You see,
A lot of this money's going out the door this year.
Time out.
Yeah, sure.
You could control your electric usage and what you spend. Property taxes, you have little control over. That's why I'd rather have more flexibility on the electric rate side, and right now, I'm not apt to want to start giving that money away. We do need the roads done. We've heard it loud and clear. Academy was in here, meeting after meeting after meeting. That's over a $400,000 hit to our bottom line. Those residents were told they were going to get it done, and now they expect it.
I'm not averse to spending the money. It's, I'm still suggesting 3 million. In fact, the last part of the argument was more about how are we paying for some of this. Is not, we're still at 3.5 million. I'm done arguing about that.
Even
Okay,
3 million
we're going to
versus...
try to wrap things up. I think Ben and then
No, that's
Carmela.
all right. I'll
So we're
pass.
not,
I'll pass.
Carmela, you haven't said.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing about the electric surplus and what it has done for this town. Over the years, we've utilized it, and, I was looking at the background that was done January 27th for us. In 2008, the actual, what we utilized in municipal budget, $5,000. In 2009, it was $5,200 and whatever.
That's 5.2
We
million.
have been,
But-
excuse me.
Pat,
Excuse me. I think that we have been extremely fortunate to have this utility to help us. And I just want to say that I think that this is an excellent budget. It's the first time since I bought a house and I'm living here that my taxes are going to be zero. So I'm kind of looking forward to telling people. I'm very proud of the fact that we're going to take $100,000 and we're going to help people that really deserve. And I'm hoping, as Ben says, that this will only be the beginning, that we will be able to look at the cost of electricity. I'm hoping that in the next year or so, that we can start teaching people how to conserve and, and move in that particular vein. I'm still going to say, cutting this budget by $500,000, that means somebody's road is not going to get done. And I am not going to tell one of those people of the 14 roads or whatever we made a decision about, okay, that we're not going to do those roads. There's a lot of other things in that budget, that capital budget, that are absolutely necessary. So, who is going to make that decision? Is it going to be a car? Is it going to be a truck? Is it going to be equipment and whatever? So I feel very proud of what has been done here by the administration. I know that Ben has been working real hard on this as well, so I appreciate it. I appreciate all of the hard work. And, hopefully we can move forward and you can get your wish. I have an electric bill just like everybody else here. So I'd like to see a decrease, but I think this year coming up is going to teach us some very good lessons. And I think what the strategic planning committees are going to do for us is to help us in those plans.
All right, roll call vote.
Okay. Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
No.
Great. So, Robert, you have your marching orders. Invitation number 2, and don't leave yet, Robert, because just in case there's any questions that we need. He does, okay, then you have permission from Tom to leave. We are now on to the second invitation for discussion. We may step up and discuss anything. The same rules apply as far as keep your comments to 3 minutes or less, but I'll really enforce it this time. And please state your name, your address. Is anyone wishing to be heard? Stephen.
Steve Stocker, Park Avenue. Thanks for giving me a few moments here. I'm a little confused. The electric company, why does the town own the electric company if not to generate what you call a surplus that's really a profit? And, well, what are you going to do with that profit if you're not going to use it? Use it for your capital expenses, use it for your operating expenses. I mean, to me, that's why it's owned. The idea, it was nice when I first moved here. Our electric bill was 25% lower than any other electric bill in the state of New Jersey. And that was nice. And things changed. The bad electric contract, the surplus of $10 million kind of dwindled away back up. But, Jesus, now there's questions, is $3 million too much? Well, it's not enough. You've got to build it back up to the 10. We were a lot safer from anything that could possibly happen. The idea of lowering the electric rate by what I hear is 10%, that's crazy at this point. You haven't hit the summer fluctuation of peak when you have to pay $1.40 or something a kilowatt hour, $1.60, $1.85 a kilowatt hour, depending on how hot it is and how many peak days you got. It could cost you hundreds, millions of dollars just for one day of peak service. You have no backup. You're not generating anything. You're buying your electric utilities from another generator, but you have the right to be a generator. That's where your cost savings are. You cut out the middleman. You cut out the delivery charges. You cut out the demand charges because you're generating it right here in Madison. You used to have a smokestack over there on Jane, and then somebody decided they didn't like the smell one day, or it was going to cost too much to put cement on the outside of it to stabilize the chimney, and you stopped. And you put yourselves at risk of whatever the market wants you to bear. It's not that you have a big choice about it, unless you buy out into the future like you just started to do. But again, you don't know what the fluctuation this summer is going to do. So I'm with Councilman Wolkowitz here. You cannot cut this year's until you see what that fluctuation could possibly be. As I said, it would just be not right. I mean, a recent point was your lowering of the rate of the open space funding rate I want to thank you. You saved me $4 a month or $40 a year or something like that. But I don't see it. I don't feel it. But what happened when I came out in December and said, $40,000. You got a $29 million budget. What's $40,000? It's nothing. But I'm told there's a scarcity. Well, if there was a scarcity, the argument was if you did nothing with that tax rate, it was going to generate too much money. And you came to a number that you said was going to generate more money than you ever had, and then it turned into a scarcity for whatever reasons. It's a scarcity. It happened. It was not risk assessed properly. Things happen that you have no control over, and you're going for bigger bucks now with the electric company. And I'm sorry, I got a real problem.
Just so you know, if you can wrap up, Stephen.
I'm wrapping up.
Okay.
I have a real problem with the top 50 people getting a $2 million electric rate cut. And well, it's going to be a $4 rate cut to me. I'm sorry, I don't spend that much money on electricity. And maybe it's a $40 cut to an average family in this town. But that's not going to equal $2 million. These top 50 people are going to get $2 million, and they're not even residents. They're businesses, they're schools, universities. And that's that.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to be heard?
You know,
No.
well, one
Pat,
thing,
Pat,
I take objection to being called crazy.
Pat, This is sponge time for the council, is just listen to,
Okay, then at the end, can I speak?
no,
No.
no. Sorry.
Maureen Byrne, 49 Albright. You know, Councilman Landrigan described this budget as with many great words that I can't think of right now at 10:30. But I will add one word to it, and I will add holistic. And I think this budget was crafted as a way of addressing items and things that had been left to the wayside, had been left undone, needed to be done, have gotten to the point where they're no longer necessary, they're actually critical. And you know, we've identified 19 roads. Well, those 19 roads were identified before these snowstorms came through, and I am sure that when the snows finally recede, and I am promised that they will, like the waters in the flood, will recede, I am sure that we are going to find that we have additional roads that need upkeep. And so the need for those capital improvement fund is going to be even greater. I was at the meeting where those projects were presented, and not a single one of them was superfluous. Not a single one of them was an item that hadn't been introduced in previous years. So, you know, we can talk about cutting $500,000, and it sounds great to cut $500,000, but which street are you going to cut? And as Councilmember Vitale said, are you going to be the one to break the news to them? And going forward, yes, it would be nice to take the electrical surplus and divvy it out. But there are capital improvements we can make to our electric utility that would, in the end, help people reduce their electrical bills. There are smart electrical meters that measure when people use their energy as opposed to an overall energy. And we've talked about installing those smart meters. Taking the money, installing smart meters, and rewarding people for not using energy during off-peak hours would become a win-win for everyone. So I thank you all. I know you got here an hour earlier than I did. It's now 4.5 hours into what you've been doing. Thank you all for the time you put in here, the hours you put in behind the scenes. And I know that you all are working your very best to create a budget that is in the very best interests of all of Madison. Thank you.
Thank you. To reflect accurate budget, we started at 7, so it's only 3.5 hours today. So, anyone else wishing to be heard? Seeing none,
Not by my standards. It was 5.5 hours by my count.
well, there's a joke about that. We'll close this part of the meeting. There are no ordinances for introduction. May I have a statement on consent agenda resolutions?
Consent agenda resolutions will be enacted with a single motion. Any resolution requiring expenditure is supported by a certification of availability of funds. Any resolution requiring discussion will be removed from the consent agenda. All resolutions will be reflected in full in the minutes.
Mayor, I move consent agenda resolution R 76-2014 through R 82-2014.
I'll second that.
Discussion? Any that need to be pulled?
Wait a minute, did I take?
Roll call vote.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
I thought that was the case.
Oh, Ms. Bailey?
Bailey?
Yes. I'm
Mr.
sorry,
Wolkowitz?
I didn't hear them answer.
No, we did.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And Mr. Rowe?
We can't hear you.
No?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
I don't get it.
All right, now.
A little confusion. There is no unfinished business. May I have approval of vouchers.
Public Safety, $31,442.88. Health and Public Assistance, $966.73. Public Works and Engineering, $124,581.93. Community Affairs, $409.54. Finance and Borough Clerk, $3,069,065.75. Utilities, $918,601.40. Totals $4,145,068.23.
Motion?
I move the approval of the vouchers.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call vote?
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
New business, I apologize, I meant to have this on here, but I don't want to go another 2 weeks without getting our shared services with Board of Education appointed, so we have to do it on an annual basis. As a liaison to the Board of Education, Rob Catanello, as previous year liaison, Ben Wolkowitz, and myself as mayor representative. So present those names for our shared services for 2014 to the Board of Education. Can I have a motion?
I'll move it.
I'll second it.
Discussion? Roll call vote?
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
And there we go.
That's it.
I move that we adjourn.
Okay.
Very good.
That's okay, my pleasure.
Philosophy.
Yes.
Could you send it to me? Sure. Oh, good. 'Cause
Yeah, include me too. You should send
everybody,
it.
okay.
Yeah, you should. I mean, because I think the problem part of that. Or
No.
would also,